A girl marked by scandal, a ballroom filled with whispers, one man who saw what others refused to see. Tonight, everything changes. The year is 1889. In the glittering heart of New York's high society, where fortunes are built on steel and reputations crumble with a single glance, Eleanor Whitmore stands alone. They dressed her in black, not for mourning, but for shame. Her family's plan was simple: parade her before society one last time, let them see her humiliation, then ship her away to distant relatives in Boston. But they didn't account for one thing. They didn't account for him. The steel baron who built an empire with his bare hands. The man who never cared what society thought. The man who would choose her in front of everyone. This is the story of how one choice changed two lives forever. If you love stories of defiance, redemption, and unexpected love, subscribe to our channel and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now let's step into that ballroom. The Whitmore mansion stood like a monument to fading glory on Fifth Avenue, its limestone facade concealing the rot within. Eleanor Whitmore had learned early that appearances were everything in this world. At 22 years old, she had mastered the art of the perfect posture, the demure smile, the carefully measured response that revealed nothing. But all that training couldn't save her from what her brother had done. She stood before her bedroom mirror, watching her mother's maid fasten the buttons of the black silk gown. Not mourning black, that would have been respectable. This was punishment black. Scandal black, the kind of black that announced to every guest at tonight's Vanderbilt ball that Eleanor Whitmore was damaged goods. "Miss Eleanor," the maid whispered, her fingers trembling on the buttons. "Perhaps you could feign illness. You don't have to go." Eleanor met the woman's eyes in the mirror and give them the satisfaction of thinking, "I'm hiding. No, Martha, I'll face them." The truth was far more complicated. 3 months ago, her brother Richard had gambled away not just his own inheritance, but Eleanor's dowry and a substantial portion of their father's business holdings. The scandal had rocked their social circle. Worse, Richard had forged documents using Eleanor's name, making it appear she had been complicit in securing loans from several prominent families. She was innocent. But in New York society of 1889, innocence mattered less than appearance. The Whitmores had decided that Eleanor would take the blame, spare Richard's reputation, and then disappear quietly to Boston, where distant cousins would take her in. Out of sight, out of mind, the family name would recover, eventually. Tonight was her final public appearance. Her parents had insisted. One last showing at the Vanderbilt ball, wearing black to signal her disgrace, and then exile. Her mother had been quite clear about the symbolism. "Let them see you've been properly chastened," Catherine Whitmore had said that morning, her voice cold as winter steel. "Let them see we take this seriously. Then we can all move forward." Eleanor descended the grand staircase of her family home, each step measured and deliberate. Her father waited in the foyer, his face carved from granite, eyes refusing to meet hers. Richard stood beside him, perfectly groomed in his evening clothes, a slight smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Eleanor," her father said flatly, "remember what we discussed. You will be gracious. You will accept the consequences of your involvement. You will not embarrass this family further." The carriage ride to the Vanderbilt mansion was suffocating. Eleanor sat across from her parents, the black silk of her gown pooling around her like an accusation. Her mother stared out the window. Her father read the evening paper. Neither spoke to her. She might as well have been invisible. The Vanderbilt ball was the event of the season. Every prominent family would be there. The mansion blazed with lights, music spilling from the open doors as carriages lined up to deposit New York's elite. Eleanor watched young women in whites and pastels, stepping out laughing, their futures bright and unwritten. Hers was already over. They entered the grand ballroom and Eleanor felt the shift immediately. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. The whispers began like a wave rippling through the crowd. That's her. The Whitmore girl. Wearing black. How appropriate. I heard she helped her brother steal from the Astors. Shameless, really. Eleanor kept her chin high, her expression serene. She had prepared for this. She would survive this. Her mother's hand gripped her elbow, steering her through the crowd like a prisoner being marched to execution. Across the ballroom, she could see the other debutantes, girls she'd known since childhood. Caroline Astor caught her eye and immediately looked away. Margaret Vanderbilt whispered something to her companion, and they both laughed. Even the young men who had once competed for her attention now studied their champagne glasses with sudden fascination. Eleanor's former best friend, Victoria Hammond, approached with a group of girls. For one moment, Eleanor hoped. "Eleanor," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "How brave of you to come tonight. Though I must say, the black is quite fitting. Are you in mourning for your reputation?" The girls behind Victoria tittered. Eleanor felt the words like a slap, but she didn't flinch. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. "Victoria," she replied evenly, "how kind of you to notice. I chose black because it matches my mood. I'm finding that true friends are as rare as hen's teeth, and false ones are everywhere." Victoria's smile hardened. "Well, I suppose we all show our true colours eventually, don't we?" She swept away, her entourage following like ducklings. Eleanor's mother materialized at her side. "Control yourself," she hissed. "You're making things worse." "How could they possibly be worse, Mother?" "Don't test me, Eleanor." The orchestra began a waltz. Eleanor watched couples take the floor, swirling in perfect synchronization. She had loved dancing once. She had loved all of this, the music, the laughter, the sense of belonging to something grand and beautiful. Now she saw it for what it truly was, a gilded cage where the bars were made of judgment and the locks were forged from gossip. She retreated to the edge of the ballroom, positioning herself near a marble column where she could observe without being directly in the line of fire. Her father had already disappeared into the smoking room. Her mother was engaged in damage control, speaking with Mrs. Astor in hushed, urgent tones. Richard found her there, champagne glass in hand, looking entirely too pleased with himself. "Sister," he said, his voice mockingly cheerful, "you're handling this remarkably well. I'm almost impressed." Eleanor turned to face him, keeping her voice low. "You did this. You forged my name. You stole from our friends, and I'm the one wearing the black dress." "Yes, well," Richard shrugged. "That's how the world works, Eleanor. Father needs me to carry on the family name. You were always going to marry and become someone else's problem eventually. This way just expedites the process. You're despicable. I'm practical. There's a difference." He leaned closer and she could smell the brandy on his breath. "Don't look so tragic. Boston isn't the end of the world. Maybe you'll find some provincial merchant willing to overlook your circumstances, though I wouldn't hold my breath." He walked away, leaving Eleanor trembling with rage and humiliation. This was her family. These were the people who were supposed to protect her. Instead, they had fed her to the wolves to save themselves. She needed air. Eleanor slipped through the French doors onto one of the mansion's many balconies. The night air was cool against her heated skin. Below, the lights of New York stretched endlessly, thousands of lives being lived, thousands of stories unfolding. Somewhere out there, people were free. Somewhere out there, the truth mattered more than appearances. "Quite a spectacle in there." Eleanor spun around. A man stood in the shadows at the far end of the balcony, barely visible in the dim light. She hadn't realized anyone else was out here. "I apologize," she said stiffly. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding. I came out here to escape the same circus you did." He stepped forward, and the light from the ballroom caught his face. Eleanor's breath stopped. She knew who he was. Everyone knew who he was. James Blackwood, the Steel Baron, the man who had built an empire from nothing, who had clawed his way up from the Pittsburgh mills to become one of the wealthiest men in America. He was probably in his early 30s, though his face had the hardness of someone who had lived twice that long. Dark hair, sharp features, eyes that missed nothing. He was also completely unwelcome in polite society. New money, no family name, no refinement. The old guard despised him even as they envied his fortune. "Mr. Blackwood," Eleanor said, inclining her head slightly, "you know me." He sounded amused. "Everyone knows you, sir. You're rather infamous. Is that what they call it?" He moved closer, studying her with an intensity that should have been improper but somehow wasn't. "And you're Eleanor Whitmore, the girl they dressed in black." Eleanor felt her cheeks flush. "Yes, I suppose I'm rather infamous myself at the moment." "They're for crimes you didn't commit." She stared at him. "How would you know that?" "Because I make it my business to know things, Miss Whitmore. Your brother forged your signature. He gambled away money that wasn't his, and your family is letting you take the fall because preserving his reputation is more valuable than protecting you." He paused. "Am I wrong?" Eleanor's throat tightened. "No, you're not wrong." "Then why are you here? Why subject yourself to this?" "Because my mother insisted. Because I'm supposed to show proper contrition before they ship me off to Boston. Because—" her voice cracked slightly. "Because I suppose I hoped that someone, anyone, might actually believe I was innocent." James Blackwood regarded her for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. Not a polite society smile, but something genuine and almost conspiratorial. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "how would you like to give all those people in there something to really talk about?" Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "What do you mean?" James Blackwood gestured toward the ballroom, where the music swelled and the dancers whirled in their carefully choreographed patterns. "They want a scandal. They want to see you humiliated. Let's give them something far more interesting." "Mr. Blackwood, I don't—" "They've already decided who you are, Miss Whitmore. They've written your story without your permission. But what if you could rewrite it? What if, instead of slinking away to Boston in disgrace, you walked back into that ballroom on my arm?" Eleanor felt dizzy. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious when it comes to business, and make no mistake, this would be a business proposition." He leaned against the balcony railing, completely at ease despite the social minefield he was suggesting they dance through. "Your family wants you gone because you're an embarrassment. My presence here tonight is barely tolerated because I have more money than half the men in that room combined. But I'm still the coal miner's son from Pittsburgh. I'm still the man who works with his hands. They'll never truly accept me. Then why do you care what they think? I don't, but I care about what certain business opportunities require. There are contracts I want, investments I need to make that require social acceptability. A wife from an old family would provide that." He looked at her directly. "You need protection from your family's cruelty. I need legitimacy in their world. We could help each other." Eleanor's mind reeled. "You're proposing marriage to a woman you met 5 minutes ago. I'm proposing a solution to both our problems. You're intelligent, clearly stronger than they give you credit for, and frankly, you're wasted on these people. I can offer you freedom from your family, a life where you won't be anyone's scapegoat, and enough wealth that you'll never have to depend on anyone again. In exchange for what? Playing the proper society wife? Pretending to be someone I'm not? In exchange for being exactly who you are, Miss Whitmore. I don't want a simpering debutante. I want a partner who understands that this world is ruthless and survival requires strategy." He extended his hand. "I want someone who's already survived being thrown to the wolves and came out fighting." Eleanor stared at his outstretched hand. This was insane. He was a stranger. She knew nothing about him except his reputation, and that reputation was hardly reassuring. He was known to be brilliant, but brutal in business, a man who crushed competitors and showed no mercy. But what were her alternatives? Boston and a life of quiet shame, remaining under her family's control, forever marked by a crime she didn't commit. And there was something else. Something in the way he looked at her, not with pity or disgust, but with respect, recognition, as if he saw past the black dress and the whispers to something worth salvaging. "If I walk back in there with you," Eleanor said slowly, "they'll tear us both apart. Let them try. My family will disown me. From what I can see, they've already done that. They've just been too cowardly to make it official." Eleanor thought of her mother's cold indifference, her father's silence, Richard's smug satisfaction. They had sacrificed her without hesitation. They had dressed her in black and paraded her like a criminal. She thought of Victoria Hammond's cruel mockery, of the whispers that had followed her through the ballroom, of the years of quiet desperation that awaited her in Boston. And then she looked at James Blackwood's hand, still extended, still waiting. "If I do this," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I need your word that you won't abandon me when the gossip gets too vicious. I need to know that this isn't some elaborate joke at my expense. You have my word, Miss Whitmore. I don't joke about business, and I don't abandon my allies." Eleanor took his hand. His grip was firm, calloused from years of real work, so different from the soft hands of the gentleman inside who had never done anything more strenuous than sign their names. "Then let's give them a show, Mr. Blackwood." They walked back into the ballroom together, and the effect was instantaneous. Conversations stopped mid-word. The orchestra faltered for half a beat before recovering. Every eye in the room turned toward them. Eleanor Whitmore, the disgraced daughter in her black silk dress, entering on the arm of James Blackwood, the steel baron that society loved to hate. Eleanor's mother looked like she might faint. Her father's face turned an alarming shade of purple. Richard actually dropped his champagne glass, the crystal shattering on the marble floor. But James Blackwood seemed utterly unconcerned. He guided Eleanor through the crowd with the confidence of a man who owned the room, nodding politely to stunned faces, offering pleasant greetings to people too shocked to respond. "Mr. and Mrs. Vanderbilt," he said, stopping before their hosts. "Thank you for a magnificent evening. I hope you don't mind that I've been monopolizing Miss Whitmore's company. I find her conversation far more stimulating than the usual ballroom chatter." Mrs. Vanderbilt's fan fluttered frantically. "Mr. Blackwood, how unexpected. Life is full of surprises, isn't it?" He turned to Eleanor. "Miss Whitmore was just telling me about her plans for the future. Fascinating prospects." Eleanor played along, though her heart was racing. "Mr. Blackwood has been most kind in offering his perspective on various matters." "I'm sure he has," Mr. Vanderbilt said dryly, though there was a glint of amusement in his eyes. Of all the old guard, he was perhaps the most pragmatic. He recognized power when he saw it, regardless of its source. Eleanor's mother descended on them like an avenging angel. "Eleanor, a word. Now." "I'm afraid Miss Whitmore is occupied at the moment," James said smoothly. "Perhaps later?" "I am her mother, sir. I will speak with my daughter when I choose." "Then speak. I have no objection to witnesses." Catherine Whitmore's lips pressed into a thin line. She couldn't make a scene. Not here, not in front of everyone. That would only add to the scandal. She was trapped by the same social rules she had used to trap Eleanor. "This is highly inappropriate," she hissed. "Eleanor, you will come with me immediately." "Actually, Mother, I don't think I will." Eleanor felt a strange exhilaration rising in her chest. "I'm rather enjoying myself." "You're making a spectacle." "Aren't I already a spectacle? You dressed me in black for that very purpose, didn't you? To make sure everyone knew I was being punished?" Eleanor's voice remained calm, but there was steel in it now. "Well, I'm done being punished for Richard's crimes." Gasps rippled through the nearby crowd. Eleanor's father appeared, his face thunderous. "That is enough, Eleanor. You will go home. Now." "I don't think so, Father." Eleanor squeezed James's arm slightly, drawing strength from his steady presence. In fact, I don't think I'll be going home at all. Not tonight. Not ever. How dare you? How dare I? Eleanor's voice rose slightly, carrying to the edges of the crowd that had gathered around them. How dare I refuse to continue being sacrificed for Richard's mistakes? How dare I want to live my own life instead of being exiled for crimes I didn't commit? The ballroom had gone completely silent. Even the orchestra had stopped playing. Every person there was watching the confrontation unfold. Richard pushed through the crowd. "Eleanor, you're being hysterical. Mr. Blackwood, surely you can see my sister is overwrought. The scandal has affected her nerves." "Miss Whitmore's nerves seem perfectly sound to me," James interrupted. "In fact, she's the most clear-headed person I've met in this room." "You don't know what you're talking about," Richard snapped. "This is a family matter." It became my matter when I decided to court your sister." The announcement hit like a thunderclap. Eleanor's mother actually swayed on her feet. Her father's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Richard looked like he'd been struck. "Court her?" Catherine finally managed. "You can't be serious. She's damaged goods. She's been involved in scandal. She's been framed by her own brother and betrayed by her own family," James said coldly. "I know exactly what happened, Mrs. Whitmore. I know Richard forged Eleanor's signature on those documents. I know he gambled away her dowry and used her name to secure loans he never intended to repay. And I know you all decided it was easier to destroy her reputation than to hold him accountable." The crowd erupted in whispers. Richard's face went white. "You have no proof," he started. "I have bank records. I have testimony from 3 different clerks who watched you forge those signatures. I have documentation of every gambling debt you've incurred in the past year." James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Did you really think I'd make an offer for your sister without investigating? I don't invest in anything without knowing exactly what I'm buying." Eleanor stared at him. He had known. He had known everything before he even spoke to her on the balcony. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was a calculated move. She should have been angry. Instead, she felt oddly grateful. Someone had finally bothered to find the truth. Her father found his voice. "Even if what you say is true, and I'm not admitting anything, you can't possibly want to associate yourself with this family. The scandal will be redirected." James looked around the ballroom, addressing the crowd directly. "Let me be clear. I intend to marry Eleanor Whitmore. Anyone who wishes to continue doing business with Blackwood Steel will treat her with the respect she deserves. Anyone who repeats slanderous accusations about her character will find their contracts terminated and their credit difficult to obtain." It was a threat, plain and simple, and it was effective. Several men in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. James Blackwood controlled too much of the steel industry, had too many fingers in too many financial pies to be crossed lightly. "You can't blackmail society into accepting you," someone called from the crowd. "I'm not blackmailing anyone. I'm simply making my intentions clear and allowing people to make their own choices accordingly." James turned back to Eleanor's parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, I'll call on you tomorrow to discuss terms. I assume you'll want some time to process this development." He didn't wait for an answer. He simply guided Eleanor toward the exit, the crowd parting before them like the Red Sea. They didn't speak until they were in his carriage. The door shut against the chaos they'd left behind. Only then did Eleanor release the breath she'd been holding. That was, she couldn't find the words. "Necessary," James finished. "They would have destroyed you, slowly, quietly, but completely. I simply accelerated the timeline and changed the ending. You investigated my family. You knew about Richard before you ever spoke to me." "Of course I did. I investigate everyone I do business with. When I heard about the Whitmore scandal, I looked into it. It took me less than a week to uncover the truth." He looked at her seriously. "I don't make impulsive decisions, Miss Whitmore. I wanted you to understand that. This isn't a rescue born of sentiment. It's a strategic alliance that benefits us both." Eleanor processed this. "You're saying you don't care about me. This is purely transactional. I'm saying I don't believe in fairy tales. I believe in partnerships based on mutual benefit and honest terms. You need protection and independence. I need social legitimacy. We can provide these things for each other without pretending there's some grand romance at play." It should have stung. Instead, Eleanor found it oddly refreshing. No lies, no false promises. Exactly. Just a clear agreement between two people who understand how the world actually works. Eleanor looked out the carriage window at the passing streets. Behind her was everything she'd ever known, her family, her social circle, her entire life. Ahead was, what? A marriage to a stranger? A new life built on pragmatism rather than love? But at least it would be her life, her choice, not one forced on her by people who had proven they cared nothing for her welfare. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My home. You'll have your own rooms, properly chaperoned, of course. Tomorrow we'll make the formal arrangements. Your family will protest, but they won't stop us. They can't afford to." He paused. "Unless you've changed your mind. I can return you to the ball if you prefer." Eleanor thought of her mother's horror, her father's rage, Richard's panic. She thought of the whispers that would follow her forever if she went back, and she thought of the alternative, this strange, cold arrangement with a man who at least offered honesty. "No," she said firmly, "I haven't changed my mind. Whatever happens next, it has to be better than what I'm leaving behind." James Blackwood nodded. "Then we have an understanding, Miss Whitmore. Welcome to your new life." The carriage rolled through the night, carrying Eleanor away from everything she'd known and toward a future she couldn't begin to predict. She had made her choice. Now she would have to live with the consequences, whatever they might be. The Blackwood mansion stood in stark contrast to the ornate excess of Fifth Avenue's older estates. It was newer, built with the same ruthless efficiency that characterized its owner. Clean lines, solid construction, wealth displayed through quality rather than ostentation. Eleanor found it oddly comforting. Mrs. Adelaide Brennan, the housekeeper, showed Eleanor to her rooms with professional courtesy that masked whatever shock she felt at the late-night arrival of a young woman in a black ball gown. The suite was spacious, tastefully furnished, and blessedly private. "Mr. Blackwood has asked me to ensure you have everything you need, miss," Mrs. Brennan said. "I'll have fresh clothes sent up in the morning and breakfast whenever you prefer." "Thank you." Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. "Mrs. Brennan, does Mr. Blackwood entertain many guests?" The housekeeper's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Blackwood keeps to himself, miss. He works quite a lot. You're the first young lady who's stayed here, if that's what you're asking." It was exactly what Eleanor was asking. "I see. Thank you for your discretion." "Of course, miss. Welcome to the household." After Mrs. Brennan left, Eleanor removed the black dress and hung it in the wardrobe. She would never wear it again. Tomorrow she would burn it if possible. She found a nightgown laid out for her, simple, clean, perfectly respectable, and climbed into bed. Sleep didn't come easily. Her mind replayed the evening's events over and over. The humiliation of the ball, the unexpected meeting with James Blackwood, the public confrontation with her family. The carriage ride that had changed everything. What had she done? Morning brought clarity, or at least resignation. Eleanor woke to find a selection of day dresses in her wardrobe, all in her size, all of excellent quality. Either Mrs. Brennan was remarkably efficient, or James Blackwood had planned this even more carefully than she'd realized. She chose a deep burgundy dress and made her way downstairs. A maid directed her to the breakfast room, where James sat reading the morning papers with the intense focus of a general studying battle plans. He looked up when she entered. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore. I trust you slept well?" "Well enough, considering." Eleanor helped herself to coffee from the sideboard. "I assume the papers are already full of last night's events?" "Spectacularly so." He slid one across the table to her. "You've made the society pages. Congratulations." The headline screamed, "Steele, Baron claims disgraced debutante. Blackwood's bold move stuns high society." Eleanor skimmed the article, which was equal parts scandal and speculation. Her family had refused to comment, which the papers interpreted as either shock or strategic silence. Several prominent society matrons had been quoted expressing everything from horror to grudging admiration for James's audacity. "Mrs. Astor says you've committed social suicide," Eleanor observed. "Mrs. Astor said the same thing when I bought my first mansion. I'm still here, she'll adjust. And if she doesn't, then she doesn't. Miss Whitmore, you need to understand something. I don't play by their rules because I was never invited to their game. I built my own game with my own rules, and I made myself too valuable to ignore. That's the only way people like us survive." People like us? Outsiders. People who don't fit their neat little categories. You were born into their world, but you never truly belonged there. If you had, they wouldn't have turned on you so quickly. He set down his paper. "Your parents will be here within the hour. We need to discuss terms before they arrive." Eleanor set down her coffee cup carefully. "What kind of terms?" "For our marriage. I've drafted a contract. You should review it." He produced a document from his briefcase. Eleanor took it, scanning the dense legal language. As she read, her eyebrows rose steadily higher. "This gives me complete financial independence. You'll have your own bank account, your own income from investments I'll establish in your name. You won't have to ask me for money. You won't have to ask anyone. And if the marriage doesn't work, if we decide to separate, you keep everything. The investments, the income, a residence of your choosing. I won't leave you destitute, Miss Whitmore." "That would defeat the entire purpose of this arrangement." Eleanor continued reading. "You're not requiring conjugal rights." James met her eyes steadily. "I'm requiring honesty and partnership. What happens between us beyond that will be mutually agreed upon. I'm not interested in a wife who submits to me out of obligation or fear." "Then what are you interested in?" "An ally, someone who understands the game we're playing and has the intelligence to play it well. Someone who won't crumble under pressure or betray me when things get difficult." He leaned back in his chair. "Last night, you stood up to your entire family in front of New York's elite. You made a choice that could have destroyed you. That takes courage. That's what I'm interested in." Eleanor studied him. In daylight, without the drama of the ballroom, she could see the calculation in his eyes more clearly. This was a man who thought several moves ahead, who treated life like a chess game, where every piece had a purpose. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone cruder, perhaps. More obviously ruthless. The papers paint you as this brutal industrialist who crushes anyone in his path. I am that. But brutality in business doesn't require brutality in personal relationships. In fact, the two are counterproductive. I need you as a partner, not a victim." A commotion in the front hall interrupted them. Raised voices, Mrs. Brennan's firm tones attempting to restore order. Eleanor's parents had arrived. James stood smoothly. "Show them in, Mrs. Brennan." Eleanor's mother swept into the breakfast room like an avenging goddess, her father close behind. Both looked like they hadn't slept. Richard trailed after them, uncharacteristically subdued. "This is an outrage," Catherine Whitmore announced. "You've abducted our daughter." "I've done no such thing. Your daughter came willingly and is free to leave at any time." James gestured to Eleanor. "Ask her yourself." All eyes turned to Eleanor. She stood, squaring her shoulders. "I'm staying, Mother, of my own free will." "You don't know what you're doing. This man is using you to gain social acceptance. Once he's achieved his aims, he'll discard you like you discarded me." Eleanor's voice was quiet but cutting. "At least Mr. Blackwood has been honest about his intentions. Can you say the same?" Her father stepped forward. "Eleanor, think about what you're throwing away. Yes, there was a scandal, but it would have blown over. In Boston, you could have started fresh. As a disgraced woman living on family charity, grateful for whatever scraps of respectability distant cousins might throw my way." Eleanor shook her head. "No, father, I'm done being grateful for crumbs." "You're being foolish," Richard finally spoke. "This is revenge, nothing more. You're angry about last night, about the dress, about everything. But this, marrying him, you'll regret it." "Will I? At least I'll regret my own choices instead of suffering for yours." James cleared his throat. "If we could focus on practicalities. Mr. Whitmore, I'm prepared to settle Eleanor's dowry debt, the one Richard gambled away. I'll also clear any outstanding loans taken in her name. In exchange, you'll provide your blessing for our marriage, and make no public statement suggesting Eleanor was anything but innocent in your son's schemes." Eleanor's father stiffened. "You're attempting to buy my daughter." "No. I'm attempting to clean up your son's mess and ensure Eleanor doesn't continue to pay for it. You can accept my terms or refuse them, but either way, we're marrying. The only question is whether you want to salvage what's left of your family's reputation in the process." The room fell silent. Catherine Whitmore's face cycled through several expressions: rage, calculation, resignation. Finally, she turned to her husband. "Theodore, a word, in private." They excused themselves to the hallway. Through the closed door, Eleanor could hear muffled argument. Richard remained in the breakfast room, staring at his shoes. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said quietly. Eleanor looked at her brother with something between pity and contempt. "Yes, you did. You meant to take the money. You meant to forge my name. The only thing you didn't mean was to get caught. I would have paid it back eventually." "With what, Richard? More gambling, more schemes? You're not a victim of bad luck. You're a victim of your own selfishness. And you're a victim of Blackwood's manipulation. Can't you see that? He doesn't care about you. You're just a means to an end. Perhaps, but at least he's honest about it. At least he investigated enough to learn the truth instead of just assuming I was guilty." Eleanor crossed to stand before her brother. "You let them dress me in black. You let them parade me as a criminal. You would have let me rot in Boston for the rest of my life. And you're lecturing me about being used." Richard had no answer for that. Their parents returned, faces carefully neutral. "We'll agree to your terms," Theodore Whitmore said stiffly, "but there are conditions." "Name them." "The marriage takes place within the month. We announce it as a love match. A whirlwind courtship that began before the scandal. Eleanor's reputation is restored completely. And you never, ever publicly acknowledge what Richard did. Done. With one addition. Richard makes a full confession to me, in writing, detailing exactly what he did. I'll keep it private unless he ever attempts to harm Eleanor again. You can't ask that. I just did. Those are my terms. Accept them, or we proceed without your blessing and I release everything I know to the papers. Imagine how that scandal would look." Theodore and Catherine exchanged glances. They were trapped, and they knew it. "Fine," Theodore finally said. "Richard will provide the confession." "Excellent. I'll have my lawyers draw up the agreements. We'll announce the engagement today and marry in 3 weeks. I suggest you start spreading the narrative about the whirlwind romance. The more enthusiastically you sell it, the better it will work for everyone." After her family left, Richard shooting Eleanor one last resentful look, she sank back into her chair. The enormity of what she'd just committed to was beginning to settle over her. "That went better than expected," James observed. "Did it? I've just agreed to marry a man I barely know, alienated what's left of my family, and become part of a elaborate fiction designed to fool society." "Yes, and in exchange, you're free. You have financial security, social protection, and the chance to build a life on your own terms. I'd say that's a fair trade." Eleanor couldn't argue with his logic, but it didn't make the situation feel any less surreal. What happens now? Now we convince New York society that we're madly in love. We'll need to be seen together. Dinners, theater, social calls. People need to believe this is real, or it won't work. And how do we make them believe something that isn't true? James smiled slightly. "The same way any good business deal works, Miss Whitmore. We sell them the story they want to hear, and we sell it convincingly. Can you do that? Eleanor thought about all the years she'd spent performing for society, the perfect posture, the demure smiles, the carefully crafted persona that revealed nothing. She'd been acting her entire life. What was one more performance? Yes, she said, I can do that. Good. Then let's begin. Over the following weeks, James and Eleanor became one of the most talked-about couples in New York. They were seen everywhere together. At the opera, at dinner parties hosted by pragmatic society figures willing to overlook James's origins for the sake of his wealth. At charity events where Eleanor's presence softened his rough edges. And slowly, grudgingly, society began to shift its narrative. The girl in the black dress became the woman who'd captured the steel baron's heart. The scandal became a misunderstanding that love had overcome. It was amazing what people would believe when they wanted to believe it, but there was something James hadn't anticipated, something that complicated the neat transaction he'd envisioned. He was beginning to actually enjoy Eleanor's company. She was sharp, witty, unafraid to challenge him when she thought he was wrong. During their public appearances, she played her role perfectly, the devoted fiancée, the refined lady bringing culture to the industrialist. But in private, she was something else entirely. She asked probing questions about his business, offered surprisingly astute observations about strategy, and refused to be intimidated by his reputation. "You're thinking about the Pennsylvania contract wrong," she told him one evening as they reviewed papers in his study. "You're focused on undercutting the competition, but what if you partnered with them instead? You'd control more of the market with less risk." James looked up from his ledgers. "You've been reading my correspondence. You left it on the table. Was I supposed to ignore it?" She pointed to a column of figures. "Here, if you structure it as a joint venture, both companies benefit and you eliminate the threat of a price war. It's more profitable in the long term." He studied her analysis. She was right, completely right. "Why do you care?" he asked. "This is my business, not yours. If we're going to be married, it becomes my concern too. Besides, I'm bored. You've given me financial independence, but nothing to do with my mind. Let me help. Let me be useful." It was the beginning of a partnership neither of them had expected. Eleanor started reviewing contracts, offering strategy suggestions, even accompanying James to certain business meetings where her social connections proved valuable. She was good at it, better than good. She had an instinct for reading people, for understanding motivations that complemented his analytical approach. And somewhere in the process of building their professional partnership, something shifted. James found himself looking forward to their evenings together. He started consulting her on decisions he would have made alone. He caught himself watching her during social events, admiring not just her performance, but her genuine grace under pressure. Eleanor, for her part, was discovering that the cold, calculating businessman had depth she hadn't expected. He was thoughtful in unexpected ways, remembering that she preferred tea to coffee, ensuring she had books she'd mentioned wanting to read, respecting her opinions even when they contradicted his own. The wedding approached faster than either of them anticipated. It was to be a grand affair, James's money ensuring it would be spectacular, Eleanor's connections ensuring it would be socially significant. Her family played their parts perfectly, spinning the narrative of a romance that had swept their daughter off her feet. The night before the wedding, Eleanor found James in his study, staring at papers he wasn't really reading. "Second thoughts?" she asked from the doorway. "No, you, constantly." She entered the room, closing the door behind her. "But I haven't changed my mind, if that's what you're asking." "Good, neither have I." He set down the papers. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something." "That sounds ominous." "It's not, it's just this arrangement. It was supposed to be purely practical, a business deal, nothing more. I remember, you were quite clear about that." "Yes, well," he stood, crossing to stand before her. "It turns out I'm not as pragmatic as I thought. These past weeks, working with you, getting to know you, You're remarkable, you're brilliant and brave, and you challenge me in ways I didn't know I needed, and I find myself wanting this to be more than a transaction." Eleanor's heart hammered. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I won't hold you to a loveless marriage if that's not what you want. We can proceed as planned, partners, allies, nothing more. But if you're willing, I'd like to try for something genuine, something real." Eleanor searched his face. This was the Steel Baron who allegedly felt nothing, who treated everything as a calculation. But his eyes held something she'd never seen there before: vulnerability. "I thought you didn't believe in fairy tales," she whispered. "I don't, but I'm starting to believe in us." Eleanor stepped closer, her hand finding his. "I'm scared." "So am I." "Good. That means this matters." She took a breath. "Yes, let's try for something real." He kissed her then, and it wasn't strategic or calculated. It was tentative and sweet and full of possibility. But outside the study, neither of them noticed the shadow that had been listening at the door. Neither of them saw Richard Whitmore's face contorted with rage and jealousy. Neither of them realized that the confession James had demanded, the written admission of Richard's crimes, was about to become a weapon in the worst way possible. Some enemies, it turned out, didn't know when they were beaten, and some battles were only just beginning. The wedding dawned bright and cold, December sunlight glittering off fresh snow. Eleanor woke in her rooms at the Blackwood mansion for the last time as an unmarried woman. By evening, she would be Mrs. James Blackwood. The thought filled her with equal parts anticipation and terror. Her mother arrived early to help her dress, accompanied by a small army of attendants. Catherine Whitmore had thrown herself into planning this wedding with manic enthusiasm, as if the perfection of the event could somehow erase the scandal that had preceded it. She'd chosen Eleanor's gown, an exquisite creation of white silk and Belgian lace that must have cost a fortune. James's fortune, Eleanor realized. Everything about this day was funded by the man she was about to marry. "You look beautiful," Catherine said, her voice catching slightly. It was the first genuine emotion Eleanor had heard from her in months. "Thank you, Mother." "Eleanor, Catherine hesitated, her fingers adjusting the veil unnecessarily. "I know we've been... What happened with Richard, the way we handled it, was unforgivable," Eleanor finished quietly. "But I'm choosing to move forward, for my sake, not yours." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "I don't expect your forgiveness. I just want you to know that I'm glad you found someone who sees your worth, even if it's not the match I would have chosen." It wasn't much. It wasn't nearly enough. But it was something. Eleanor nodded, accepting the olive branch for what it was. The ceremony took place at Trinity Church, packed with everyone who was anyone in New York society. Eleanor processed down the aisle on her father's arm, aware of hundreds of eyes tracking her every step. Whispers followed her like a wake, some admiring, some skeptical, all intensely curious about the girl in black who'd become a bride in white in less than a month. James waited at the altar, looking almost uncomfortable in his formal attire. But when he saw her, his expression softened into something approaching wonder. Eleanor felt her anxiety ease slightly. Whatever else this was, they were in it together. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of traditional vows and sacred music. When James slipped the ring onto her finger, Eleanor noticed his hand trembled slightly. The Steel Baron was nervous. Somehow that made her feel better. "I now pronounce you man and wife." The kiss was chaste, appropriate for public viewing, but there was a promise in it that made Eleanor's breath catch. The reception at the Blackwood mansion was spectacular. James had spared no expense, determined to prove that new money could throw a party just as impressive as old money. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, an orchestra played, champagne flowed freely, society's elite mingled and danced and pretended they'd always approved of this match. Eleanor danced first with James, then with her father, then with a succession of prominent men who wanted to curry favor with the Steel Baron through his new wife. She smiled until her face hurt, made pleasant conversation until the words became meaningless, and played the role of the radiant bride perfectly. But she was watching, always watching, and she noticed things others missed. She noticed Richard drinking too much in the corner, his eyes following her with disturbing intensity. She noticed several of James's business rivals clustered together, their conversations stopping whenever anyone approached. She noticed a thin, sharp-faced man she didn't recognize, moving through the crowd with the practiced invisibility of a servant, though he wore a guest's clothes. Something was wrong. Eleanor couldn't define it, couldn't point to any specific threat, but years of navigating society's treacherous waters had given her instincts for danger. She found James during a break in the dancing. "Do you know that man?" She nodded subtly toward the sharp-faced stranger. "Near the champagne fountain?" James followed her gaze, and his expression hardened infinitesimally. "Charles Morton. He's a journalist, specializes in exposés of the wealthy. What's he doing here?" "I don't know. But Richard's been watching him, and me, and you. Stay close to me." The rest of the reception proceeded without incident, but Eleanor couldn't shake the sense of impending disaster. When the last guests finally departed, and she and James were alone in his study, their study now, she supposed, she felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. "We survived," she said, sinking into a chair. "The wedding, yes. Marriage might prove more challenging." But he was smiling as he poured them both brandy. "You were magnificent today, every inch the society bride. I've had years of practice playing parts." Eleanor accepted the glass. "What do you think Morton wants?" "Nothing good. Men like him don't attend society weddings for the food." James frowned. "I'll have someone look into it." They didn't have to wait long. The next morning's papers contained the usual society coverage of the wedding. Glowing descriptions of Eleanor's gown, the lavish reception, the joining of old money and new. But tucked into the back pages of the more salacious publications was something else. An article by Charles Morton titled "The Whitmore Confession: What Really Happened." James read it with increasing fury. Eleanor read over his shoulder, her blood running cold. The article laid out Richard's crimes in excruciating detail. The forged signatures, the gambling debts, the loans obtained fraudulently. But it didn't stop there. It suggested that Eleanor had known all along, that her entire victimization had been a performance designed to attract a wealthy husband, that James Blackwood had been cleverly manipulated by a woman more cunning than she appeared. "This is slander," Eleanor breathed. "None of it is true. I didn't." "I know you didn't." James's voice was ice. "The question is, where did Morton get this story? Someone fed it to him. Someone with access to information about Richard's confession." They looked at each other, the same realization dawning simultaneously. "Richard," Eleanor said, "he must have kept a copy. Or no, he wouldn't destroy himself to hurt me, would he? Let's find out." They found Richard at his club, already drunk despite the early hour. James didn't bother with pleasantries. He simply threw the newspaper on the table in front of Eleanor's brother. "Did you do this?" Richard looked at the article, and something ugly twisted his features. "So what if I did? You humiliated me, forced me to confess my crimes, threatened to expose me. Did you think I'd just accept that?" "You exposed yourself," James said coldly. "This article implicates you as much as Eleanor. But it also ruins her, and that's what matters. She chose you over family, over me. She deserves to suffer for that." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice shaking with rage. "You're blaming me for your crimes? You forged my name, you stole from our friends, you let me take the blame, and now you're angry that I refused to martyr myself for you? You were always the golden child, father's perfect little princess. Even in disgrace, you managed to land a steel baron. You don't get to have everything, Eleanor. You don't get to win. This isn't about winning. This is about your pathological selfishness. Says the woman who married for money." James's fist connected with Richard's jaw before Eleanor could respond. Richard sprawled backward, blood streaming from his split lip. "Speak about my wife like that again, and I'll do more than hit you," James said quietly. "I'll destroy you, every business you touch, every door you try to open, every opportunity you seek. I'll be there to shut it down. By the time I'm done, your name will be so toxic that even your family won't claim you." Richard wiped blood from his mouth, his eyes wild. "You can't. I'm James Blackwood. I built an empire from nothing. Do you really think I can't tear down one pathetic excuse for a man?" He leaned closer. "You wanted to hurt Eleanor because you're jealous and spiteful. Congratulations, you've succeeded in making her day slightly worse, but you've also made an enemy of me. And I promise you, that's a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your miserable life." They left Richard there, slumped in his chair, the weight of his actions finally settling over him. But the damage was done. By afternoon, the story had spread throughout society. New rumors bloomed like poisonous flowers. Had Eleanor been complicit all along? Had she used the scandal to trap Blackwood? Was their marriage a fraud? James's business partners began asking uncomfortable questions. Contracts that had seemed certain suddenly required additional review. Social invitations dried up. Even Mrs. Brennan reported that several servants had given notice, uncomfortable with the renewed scandal. Eleanor sat in her new bedroom. She and James had separate rooms, as was proper, though they'd both been questioning that arrangement, and watched her carefully reconstructed reputation crumble again. James found her there an hour later. He sat beside her on the window seat without speaking, and they watched the street below together. "I'm sorry," Eleanor finally said. "This is my fault, my family, my brother." "Stop! This isn't your fault. Richard made his choices, Morton made his. We'll deal with the consequences together. Your business is suffering because of me. My business has weathered worse than gossip. We'll survive this too." He turned to face her. "Eleanor, look at me." She did, and was surprised to find not anger in his eyes, but determination. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," he continued. "We knew society would test us. This is that test. The question is, do we let them break us, or do we fight back? How do we fight lies? With truth, and with action." James stood, offering his hand. "Come with me. I have an idea." Over the next week, James and Eleanor launched a counter-offensive that was as strategic as any business campaign. They gave a carefully orchestrated interview to a respected journalist, laying out the facts of Richard's crimes with documentation James had meticulously preserved. They appeared together at charity events, demonstrating their united front. James made it known that anyone who continued spreading slander about Eleanor would find themselves on the wrong side of very expensive lawsuits. But more importantly, they worked. Publicly, visibly, they worked together. James announced a new initiative, a workers' welfare program at his steel mills, designed to improve conditions and provide education opportunities for employees' children. Eleanor took the lead in developing and presenting the program, proving she was more than just a society ornament. She was brilliant. She spoke to workers and their families, understanding their needs in ways James's analytical mind sometimes missed. She negotiated with suppliers and contractors, using her social connections to secure better terms. She transformed James's blunt force approach to business into something more nuanced and ultimately more effective. Society noticed. How could they not? Eleanor Blackwood wasn't hiding from scandal. She was working through it, building something real and valuable. The narrative began to shift again. Perhaps this marriage wasn't a fraud. Perhaps the steel baron had chosen more wisely than anyone realized. One evening, 3 weeks after the article's publication, Eleanor was reviewing blueprints for a new worker housing project when James entered the study. "I heard from my lawyers today," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Richard's trying to leave the country. Apparently, my threats weren't idle. No one will do business with him. His club has revoked his membership. Even your parents have cut off his funding." Eleanor felt a complicated mix of emotions. "He's my brother. He's the man who tried to destroy you twice. I know, but it's still difficult. She set down her pen. Does it make me weak that I feel sorry for him? No. It makes you human, which is something Richard never understood. James reached across the desk, taking her hand. You're allowed to feel complicated things about your family, Eleanor. You're allowed to be angry and hurt and still care about them. Emotions aren't business transactions. They don't follow logical rules. Eleanor squeezed his hand, grateful for the understanding. When did you become so wise about feelings? Since I married someone who taught me they matter. He smiled slightly. You've changed things, Eleanor. Not just society's perception of us, but me. I'm different because of you. Different how? Softer. More aware of people as individuals rather than assets. You see the world in ways I never did. The workers' program, I would never have thought of it that way. I would have built housing because it was efficient, not because it gave families dignity. You understand the human element I always dismissed as irrelevant. Eleanor felt warmth spreading through her chest. You're giving me too much credit. I'm giving you exactly the credit you deserve. You're remarkable, Eleanor Blackwood. I knew that the night I met you, but I didn't understand how remarkable until now. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands still linked across the desk. We make a good team, Eleanor said softly. We make an excellent team, which is why I have a proposal. James leaned forward. The workers' program has been successful beyond expectations. We've had inquiries from other industrialists about implementing similar initiatives. I want to expand it. And I want you to lead the expansion, Eleanor blinked. Lead it. James, I'm not. You're perfectly qualified. You developed it. You understand it. You have the social connections and the business acumen to make it work on a larger scale. This could be your business, Eleanor, your legacy. Women don't run businesses. Women don't run steel companies, but this isn't steel. This is social reform with a business model attached. You'd be a consultant, an advisor, perfectly respectable, and perfectly revolutionary. Eleanor's mind raced with possibilities. Her own business, her own purpose beyond being someone's wife, a chance to actually make a difference in people's lives. Yes, she said. Yes, I want to do this. James grinned. Good. Because I already had contracts drawn up. I was hoping you'd say yes. You're very sure of yourself, Mr. Blackwood. I'm very sure of you, Mrs. Blackwood. There's a difference. He stood, crossing to her side of the desk. She rose to meet him, and this time when he kissed her there was nothing chaste or appropriate about it. It was deep and hungry, and full of all the feelings they'd been dancing around for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Eleanor rested her forehead against his. I'm falling in love with you, she whispered. That wasn't part of the plan. Plans change. I'm falling in love with you too. He cupped her face gently. Is that all right? It's terrifying. Good terrifying or bad terrifying? I'm not sure yet, she smiled. Ask me again in 50 years. I will, I promise. That night, Eleanor didn't sleep in her separate bedroom. They made the choice together, conscious and deliberate, to truly become husband and wife in every sense. It wasn't the cold transaction James had originally proposed. It was tender and awkward and sweet. Two people learning each other, building something real from the ashes of what was supposed to be merely practical. But even in their happiness, neither of them noticed the shadows gathering. Richard might have been neutralized, but James Blackwood hadn't built his empire without making enemies. Powerful enemies who saw his marriage not as a love story, but as a weakness to exploit. And in the smoke-filled rooms where New York's power brokers made their deals, plans were being laid. Plans that would test Eleanor and James's partnership in ways they couldn't imagine. The Steel Baron had chosen the girl in black, but some men believed that everything, even love, had a price, and they were about to demand payment. The war for Eleanor and James's future was about to begin in earnest. Winter deepened into early spring, and Eleanor's workers' welfare consultancy flourished beyond anyone's expectations. She had offices now, a small staff, and a client list that included some of the most prominent industrialists in the Northeast. The girl who'd been paraded in black as a criminal was now sought after for her expertise and vision. But success attracted attention, and not all of it was welcome. Harrison Caldwell was one of the oldest names in American industry. His family had been building railroads since before the Civil War, and he controlled more miles of track than anyone except perhaps Cornelius Vanderbilt himself. He was also one of James's primary competitors for government contracts, and he resented the steel baron's meteoric rise with every fibre of his aristocratic being. Eleanor first met him at a charity auction in March. She was bidding on a collection of books for the Workers' Education Program when Caldwell approached her, all silver hair and practiced charm. "Mrs. Blackwood, how delightful to finally meet you properly. Your reputation precedes you." "As does yours, Mr. Caldwell." Eleanor kept her tone pleasant but cool. She knew exactly who this man was and what he represented, everything James had fought against his entire career. "I've been following your work with great interest. Revolutionary, really. Making industrialists care about their workers' welfare. Quite the accomplishment. I believe happy workers are productive workers, Mr. Caldwell. It's not charity. It's good business. Spoken like your husband. He's taught you well." There was something in his tone that made Eleanor's instincts prickle. "I'm capable of my own thoughts, sir. James doesn't need to teach me common sense." Caldwell smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Forgive me. I sometimes forget how modern you young people are. Your husband is very lucky to have found such an able partner." He moved on, leaving Eleanor unsettled. She mentioned the encounter to James that evening. "Caldwell's up to something," James said immediately. "He doesn't do charm without reason. Did he ask you anything specific?" "No, just compliments and veiled condescension. Why? What's he planning?" "That's what concerns me." "I don't know." James frowned at the fire. "He's been quiet lately. Too quiet. Men like Caldwell don't accept defeat gracefully. If I'm winning contracts he wants, he'll find a way to fight back." They didn't have to wait long to discover his strategy. 2 weeks later, Eleanor received an invitation to speak at a women's club luncheon about her workers' welfare work. It seemed innocent enough, an opportunity to promote her programs to influential women who might convince their husbands to adopt similar initiatives. She accepted. The luncheon was held at the Caldwell mansion. Eleanor should have recognized the warning sign, but she'd been so focused on her presentation that she missed it. She arrived to find 50 women assembled, all from New York's most prominent families. Mrs. Caldwell herself acted as hostess, gracious and welcoming. Eleanor gave her presentation, discussing the importance of worker education, adequate housing, and fair wages. The women listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested. She began to relax. Then Mrs. Caldwell stood. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwood, for that fascinating presentation. Before we adjourn, I wonder if you might address one small question that's been troubling some of us." Eleanor felt a chill. "Of course. We've all heard the unfortunate rumors about your family's difficulties, the scandal involving your brother. Some have suggested that your marriage to Mr. Blackwood was arranged specifically to escape those circumstances. Could you speak to that? We want to support your work, but we need to be certain of your credibility." The room went silent, every eye fixed on Eleanor. She understood immediately what this was, a trap, carefully baited and expertly sprung. If she defended herself, she'd seem defensive. If she dismissed the question, she'd seem evasive. Either way, the seed of doubt had been planted in front of 50 influential women who would spread it to 500 more by evening. Eleanor took a breath, buying herself a moment to think. Then she made a choice. "Mrs. Caldwell, you're absolutely right to ask. Credibility matters, so let me be completely honest with you all." She looked around the room, meeting eyes deliberately. "Yes, my brother committed crimes and tried to blame me. Yes, my family dressed me in black and paraded me as a criminal to protect him. Yes, my marriage to James began as a practical arrangement. He needed social legitimacy. I needed protection from my family's cruelty. Those things are all true. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Caldwell looked triumphant, but Eleanor wasn't finished. But here's what else is true. James Blackwood investigated the scandal before he ever spoke to me. He uncovered evidence of my innocence when my own family refused to look for it. He offered me not charity, but partnership. And over these past months, that partnership has become something far more valuable. I've fallen in love with my husband. Not because I had to, but because he's proven himself worthy of that love every single day. She stood, addressing the room with complete conviction. You want to know about my credibility? Judge me by my work. Look at the families living in better housing because of programs I developed. Talk to the children attending schools, funded by initiatives I designed. Examine the worker satisfaction reports from companies that have implemented my recommendations. My past doesn't define my present. My work does. And if you can't separate the two, then perhaps this isn't the audience for my message after all. Eleanor gathered her materials and walked toward the exit. Halfway there, she stopped and turned back. Oh, and Mrs. Caldwell, if your husband sent you to do his dirty work because he's too cowardly to compete with James on equal footing, you might tell him that attacking a man's wife is hardly sporting. James built his empire through innovation and hard work. Perhaps Mr. Caldwell should try the same, instead of relying on gossip and social manipulation. She left to stunned silence. The carriage ride home was a blur. Eleanor's hands shook as adrenaline drained away, replaced by the horrifying realization of what she'd just done. She'd publicly accused Harrison Caldwell of orchestrating a social ambush. She'd defended her marriage in terms that confirmed all the rumors about its origins. She'd potentially destroyed her credibility and James's reputation in one impulsive speech. James was waiting when she arrived home. News traveled fast in their circles. He'd already heard about the luncheon confrontation. I'm so sorry, Eleanor said immediately. I should have been more diplomatic. I should have... James pulled her into his arms, cutting off her apology with a kiss that took her breath away. When he finally released her, he was smiling. That, he said, was the most magnificent thing I've ever witnessed. You called out Caldwell in front of 50 society matrons and defended our marriage without compromising the truth. Do you have any idea how powerful that is? I thought I'd ruined everything. Ruined? Eleanor, you just gave half of New York's most influential women a reason to actually respect you instead of just tolerating you. You showed them you won't be intimidated or manipulated. That's not weakness. That's strength. But Caldwell can go to hell. His plan backfired spectacularly. By tonight, everyone will know he tried to ambush you, and you dismantled him publicly. That's the kind of story society loves. James cupped her face. You're not the girl in the black dress anymore, Eleanor. You're the woman who stood up to Harrison Caldwell and won. Own that. And incredibly, James was right. By the next day, Eleanor's defense of her marriage had become the talk of society, not as scandal, but as romantic triumph. The practical arrangement that had become real love resonated with people in unexpected ways. Women who'd been coldly skeptical began to thaw, seeing in Eleanor's story something aspirational. Even better, 3 of the women who'd attended the luncheon contacted Eleanor directly to inquire about implementing workers' welfare programs at their husbands' companies. Mrs. Caldwell's attempted ambush had inadvertently provided Eleanor with the perfect platform to demonstrate her competence and character. But the conflict with Caldwell wasn't over. If anything, Eleanor's public humiliation of him had escalated the situation. Harrison Caldwell was a man used to getting his way, and he didn't forgive slights. The attack, when it came, was far more direct. Caldwell challenged James to a public bidding war over a massive government contract to provide steel for new railroad expansion into the West. The contract was worth millions and would establish dominance in Western markets for a generation. Both men wanted it desperately. The bidding process would take place over several weeks, with presentations to government officials, technical specifications, and ultimately a sealed bid submitted on the final day. It was warfare by bureaucracy, and both sides knew it. James threw himself into preparation with obsessive focus. Eleanor worked alongside him, reviewing specifications, identifying cost-saving measures, helping craft presentations that balanced technical expertise with political savvy. They worked late into the night, sustained by coffee and determination. "Caldwell's going to underbid us," James said one evening, studying projections. "He can afford to take a loss on this contract just to hurt us. He has other revenue streams. We don't." "Then we don't compete on price alone," Eleanor suggested. "We compete on value. Show them that Blackwood steel isn't just cheaper, it's better, more reliable, more innovative, worth paying slightly more for because it will last longer and perform better." That's risky. Government contracts usually go to the lowest bidder. Usually, but not always. If we can make the case that our steel is genuinely superior, that the long-term value outweighs the short-term cost, we have a chance. James looked at her with something like awe. "You're brilliant, you know that?" "I've been told. Usually by you." They refocused their entire strategy around demonstrating technical superiority. James arranged demonstrations showing Blackwood steel's tensile strength compared to competitors. Eleanor cultivated relationships with officials' wives, subtly ensuring they heard about James's workers' welfare programs and ethical business practices. They built a comprehensive case that Blackwood Steel wasn't just a vendor. It was a partner in building America's future. The night before the final sealed bids were due, James and Eleanor sat in his study, their proposal complete. "Whatever happens tomorrow," James said quietly, "I want you to know something. Win or lose this contract, you've already given me more than I ever expected. You've made me better. You've made my business better. You've made my life better. That's worth more than any government contract." Eleanor leaned against him, exhausted but content. "We're going to win." "How can you be sure?" "Because we're fighting for something bigger than just a contract. We're fighting for what we've built together. And that kind of motivation is worth more than Caldwell's money or connections." The next day, they submitted their bid and waited. The government would announce the winner in 1 week. Those 7 days were agonizing. James tried to focus on other work, but Eleanor could see the tension in every movement, hear it in every word. This contract would define the next phase of his career. Losing to Caldwell wouldn't just be a business setback, it would be a personal defeat after everything that had happened. The announcement came on a Friday afternoon. A telegram arrived at the Blackwood mansion. James stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Then he looked up at Eleanor, his face breaking into the widest smile she'd ever seen. "We won." Eleanor's knees went weak with relief. "We won. We won." Not by much. Our bid was only slightly lower than Caldwell's, but the government officials cited our superior quality and ethical business practices as deciding factors. "Eleanor, they specifically mentioned the workers' welfare programs. Your programs." He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the study while she laughed in disbelief and joy. When he finally set her down, they were both breathless. "We did it," Eleanor said. "We actually did it." "No. You did it. This was your strategy, your vision. I just provided the steel." They celebrated that night with a small dinner, just the two of them, private and perfect. Over wine and laughter, they toasted their victory and their partnership, and the unexpected love that had grown from such practical beginnings. If you're loving Eleanor and James's story, hit that like button. Let's see if we can get to 1,000 likes for this incredible journey. But even in their moment of triumph, change was coming. The victory over Caldwell had proven that James Blackwood could compete with old money on equal terms. More importantly, it had proven that Eleanor Blackwood was a force to be reckoned with in her own right. Opportunities began flowing in. Industrialists across the country wanted Eleanor to consult on their workers' programs. James received inquiries about partnerships and joint ventures from companies that would never have considered him before. Together, they were reshaping what success looked like in American industry. One evening in late spring, Eleanor stood on the balcony where she'd first met James, the same balcony where he'd offered her an escape from shame and exile. The city spread below her, thousands of lights flickering in the gathering dusk. James joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That night, when you found me out here, and I was certain my life was over. I never could have imagined this." She leaned back against him. "I never could have imagined you. I knew you'd be remarkable. I just didn't know how much." Eleanor turned in his arms. "We make a good team, Mr. Blackwood. The best team, Mrs. Blackwood, and this is just the beginning." He was right. Together they would go on to transform not just their own lives, but the lives of thousands of workers across America. Eleanor's consultancy would grow into a national movement for labor reform. James's steel company would become the standard for ethical business practices, and their marriage, which had begun as cold calculation, would become the foundation for everything they built. But that was still to come. For now, they simply held each other on the balcony, watching the lights of New York, knowing they had survived the worst and emerged stronger. The girl in the black dress had become a woman who changed the world. And the steel baron who'd chosen her had found something more valuable than all his wealth and power. He'd found a true partner, an equal, a love that transformed everything. And in the end, that was worth more than any contract, any fortune, any victory. That was priceless. 15 years later, the Blackwood estate in the Hudson Valley had grown considerably since Eleanor and James first purchased the property. What had started as a weekend retreat had evolved into a sprawling compound of workers' housing, schools, a medical clinic, and at its heart, the family home where Eleanor and James raised their 3 children. Eleanor stood in the gardens, watching her eldest daughter, Catherine, named for her grandmother, though she bore none of Catherine Whitmore's coldness, chase her younger brothers through the rose bushes. At 13, Kate was already showing signs of her mother's determination and her father's strategic mind. Eleanor suspected she'd be unstoppable by the time she was 20. "They're going to ruin your roses," James observed, coming up behind her with 2 glasses of lemonade. "They're children. That's what children do." Eleanor accepted a glass, gratefully. "Besides, roses grow back. Childhood doesn't." James smiled, lines crinkling around his eyes. He was 45 now, with threads of silver at his temples that Eleanor found devastatingly attractive. Success had softened some of his harder edges without diminishing his strength. "Your mother's arriving tomorrow," he said, "for Kate's birthday celebration." Eleanor's relationship with her parents had thawed over the years, though it would never be warm. Catherine and Theodore Whitmore had eventually acknowledged their mistakes, had even apologized in their stilted way. They were respectful grandparents who saw the children several times a year. It was more than Eleanor had expected and less than she'd once hoped for. Richard had disappeared into obscurity in Europe years ago. Occasionally they heard rumors that he'd married a French widow, that he was working as a clerk in Paris, that he'd finally grown up. Eleanor had stopped trying to track him. Some relationships were better left in the past. "And Harrison Caldwell's widow sent a note," James continued. "She's making a donation to the Workers' Education Fund in his memory." Eleanor raised her eyebrows. Caldwell had died the previous winter, his railroad empire divided among squabbling heirs. In his final years, he'd reportedly softened considerably, even implementing some of Eleanor's recommended reforms at his own companies. She liked to think their confrontation had planted a seed, however unwillingly. "That's generous of her," She said Harrison respected you, that you were the only person who ever stood up to him and made him question his assumptions. James shook his head. Who would have thought? People surprise you, sometimes for the better. They watched the children play in comfortable silence. This was Eleanor's favorite time of day, the golden hour before sunset, when everything seemed suspended in amber light, perfect and peaceful. I've been thinking, James said eventually, about retiring. Eleanor turned to stare at him. You? Retire? You'd be bored within a week. Not retire completely, step back, train someone to take over the day-to-day operations, spend more time here with you and the children. I'm 45, Eleanor. I've spent my entire adult life building the company. Maybe it's time to just live. What would you do with yourself? I thought I might help you with the consultancy. You're expanding into textile factories next, aren't you? I could be useful. Eleanor smiled. You're already useful, James. You're my partner in everything that matters. Then we'll be partners in this too. Build something new together, like we always have. A cry from the garden interrupted them. Young James, 8 years old and convinced he could climb anything, had gotten stuck in an apple tree. Eleanor sighed. I'll get him, James said, already moving. You stay here and enjoy the peace while it lasts. Eleanor watched her husband stride across the lawn to rescue their son, their daughter laughing at her brother's predicament while the youngest boy clapped his hands in delight. This was her life now, messy and loud and full of love, so different from the cold perfection she'd once thought she wanted. She thought about that girl in the black dress, standing in the Vanderbilt ballroom, certain her life was over. She'd been so young, so convinced that society's judgment mattered, that her family's betrayal defined her, that happiness was something that happened to other people. If she could go back and tell that girl anything, it would be this: your life is just beginning. The worst thing that ever happened to you will lead to the best thing. Hold on, stay strong, choose yourself. The rest will follow. James returned with their son, deposited him safely on the ground, and rejoined Eleanor on the terrace. He's definitely yours, Eleanor said. That stubborn streak comes straight from you. He gets his tree climbing from your side. I've seen your mother's family portraits. They all look ready to scale mountains. They laughed together, easy and familiar. 30 years together stretched ahead of them, 30 more years of partnership and love and building something meaningful. Eleanor took James's hand. I never thanked you properly. For what? For choosing me. That night at the Vanderbilt ball, you could have walked away, you could have let me sink, but you chose me. Eleanor, I didn't rescue you. We rescued each other. He squeezed her hand. You gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. A life that matters beyond profit and loss, a family, a purpose bigger than just winning. We make a good team. We make the best team. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Their children's laughter echoed across the lawn. Somewhere in the workers' housing, families were gathering for dinner. Children were doing homework in the schools Eleanor had built. Mothers were bringing babies to the clinic James had funded. They'd changed the world, not through grand gestures or revolutionary violence, but through steady determination and partnership, and refusing to accept that the way things were was the way they had to be. The girl in the black dress had become a woman in full color, and the Steel Baron had learned that the strongest foundations were built on love. Together, they had proven that redemption was possible, that second chances could lead to first choices, that the worst moments could transform into the best life, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the fairy tale nobody believed in turned out to be real after all. Eleanor and James's story teaches us that our darkest moments don't define us. Our choices do. When society tried to shame Eleanor, she chose dignity. When her family betrayed her, she chose independence. When James offered partnership, she chose to build something real. Their journey reminds us that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about rising with grace, fighting for what matters, and surrounding ourselves with people who see our worth when others refuse to look. Love doesn't always arrive in expected packages. Sometimes it grows from honest partnership, mutual respect, and the courage to be vulnerable. Your past doesn't dictate your future. Your resilience does. Choose yourself. Choose wisely. Choose love. The rest will follow. If you loved Eleanor and James's incredible journey from scandal to triumph, subscribe to our channel for more emotional historical romances. And in the comments, tell us, what would you have done in Eleanor's place that night at the ball? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Now don't miss the next amazing story appearing on your screen.